April 24, 1944. At 24,000 feet above Brandenburg, Major Günther Rall struggled to keep his oxygen mask clear as it fogged with each heavy breath. He pushed back into the seat of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6, stunned as the American fighter stayed locked on his tail through a sharp diving turn. Through his earphones came the frantic voices of fellow pilots from Jagdgeschwader 11, men who had once ruled the skies over Europe since 1940, now sounding more like nervous trainees. Enemy at 6 o'clock, still climbing. He's holding at 400 kilometers per hour. How is he keeping up? For 3 years, Rall had trusted one simple rule of survival. American fighters could not follow German aircraft home. They didn't have the range. They couldn't match the speed at high altitude. They couldn't maintain performance deep over Germany. Yet on this day, the P-51 Mustang shattered every one of those beliefs. On his wingman's tail, the Mustang drove forward, its Packard-built Merlin engine delivering relentless power at heights where thunderbolts and lightnings usually gasped for air. Even more shocking, this fighter was still operating with fuel to spare. 600 miles from its base in England, it had enough left for another hour of combat, plus the return trip home. By contrast, Rall's own fuel gauge warned he had just 15 minutes left before reaching Brandenburg. In a single morning, the balance of air combat had turned upside down. Altitude, range, endurance, and speed, all the advantages once held by the Luftwaffe, were now in American hands. The hunters had suddenly become the hunted, right over their own capital. What Major Rall saw that day was not just a new American plane, but the beginning of the Luftwaffe's collapse. Within 1 year, Germany's proud Air Force would lose 75% of its pilots, 90% of its veteran leaders, and all control of its skies. The weapon driving this downfall was an aircraft designed in only 102 days, powered by a British engine, mass-produced in numbers the Germans could hardly believe, and flown by a steady flow of new American pilots who seemed impossible to outlast. But this crisis didn't appear overnight. It had been building since August 17, 1943, when the U.S. 8th Air Force lost 60 B-17 flying fortresses in a single day while striking Schweinfurt and Regensburg. At that point, the math of the bombing campaign looked grim for the Americans. On deep raids, bombers were suffering 20 to 25% losses, while German fighter production was actually climbing despite the damage. General Major Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's inspector of fighters, reviewed the statistics with satisfaction from his Berlin headquarters. Each B-17 carried 10 men, 10 highly trained specialists who took months to prepare. Losing them at such rates seemed unsustainable. Galland noted the Luftwaffe could afford to trade 1 fighter pilot for every 10 bomber crewmen. The odds, he believed, were firmly in Germany's favor. The Americans must turn back at Aachen, Galland assured his staff in September 1943. Their escorts don't have the range to go past the Rhine. Once they turn back, we can concentrate and destroy the bombers at will. The strategy appeared successful. On October 14, 1943, later called Black Thursday, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers and 650 men on another raid against Schweinfurt. For the next 4 months, there were no major deep raids into Germany. It seemed geography itself had handed the Luftwaffe victory in the battle for air superiority. But behind the scenes, engineering breakthroughs and industrial power were quietly shifting the outcome. The North American P-51 Mustang had first been requested by Britain in April 1940. Designed in just 102 days and flying only 149 days after the contract was signed, it was an achievement few other nations could have matched. Early Mustangs, powered by the Allison V1710 engine, performed poorly above 15,000 feet, the exact altitude bomber escorts needed. Then in April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker proposed a bold idea: fit the Mustang with the Merlin engine. This blend of American design and British power created one of the most decisive fighters of the entire war. The Packard Motor Company in Detroit began licensed production of the Merlin in August 1941, applying U.S. mass production efficiency to Britain's precision engineering. By late 1943, hundreds of Merlins were rolling out every month, each delivering around 1,650 horsepower at altitudes once thought safe for German pilots. Colonel Thomas Hitchcock, the American air attaché in London and a veteran of World War I, foresaw the outcome as early as July 1942. His report predicted, The P-51 with the Merlin engine will be superior to any existing fighter above 25,000 feet. It will have the range to escort bombers to Berlin and back. This aircraft could change the entire strategic balance in Europe. On December 1, 1943, German pilots from Jagdgeschwader 2 spotted an incoming formation of American bombers near Solingen. Confident, they assumed the escorts had already turned back. Escorts dropping away. One staff leader reported watching P-47 Thunderbolts peel off with a farewell wing waggle. The Germans rolled into their practiced attack dive. Then panic filled their radios. Indians! Indians still with the bombers. A new type still holding formation. It was their first encounter with the Merlin-powered Mustang. And from that day forward, the skies over Germany would never be the same. 8 P-51B Mustangs from the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, stayed close to the bomber formations. Thanks to their drop tanks, the fighters gained an extra 150 miles of range, extending escort coverage deeper into Germany than ever before. German pilots, used to 18 months of striking unescorted bombers at will, were unprepared mentally to face opposition this far from Allied bases. The shock became even greater on December 13, 1943, during the first major raid escorted by large numbers of P-51s. The bombers reached Kiel, 420 miles from the nearest Allied base, under cover of 16 Mustangs from the 354th Fighter Group. But these Mustangs did more than escort. They swept ahead aggressively, searching for German fighters instead of waiting to defend. Near Bremen, Major Georg-Peter Eder of Jagdgeschwader 1, credited with 78 victories, encountered them. Eder had developed specific tactics against each Allied fighter. The P-47 Thunderbolt could be outmaneuvered at high altitude. The Spitfire had limited range. The P-38 Lightning could not match German turning ability, but the P-51 didn't fit any of his categories. First contact at 7,500 meters. Eder reported back to Jagdkorps headquarters. Enemy fighters maintained speed and maneuverability superior to our Bf-109G at this altitude. Pursued my Staffel for 30 kilometers before fuel forced us to break off. The enemy showed no concern for fuel. Just a week later, Oberfeldwebel Heinz Knoke, a 33 victory ace with JG-11, noted in his diary on December 20th, "The appearance of American fighters over Hanover has shaken everyone. We once launched leisurely when bombers approached, confident we had time to climb in position. Now we must scramble immediately or risk being surprised by escorts. The war has come to our doorstep." By January 1944, German intelligence had obtained accurate data on the P-51B's capabilities, and disbelief spread across Luftwaffe command. The Mustang's statistics told the story. Speed, 440 mph at 30,000 feet, faster than any German fighter at high altitude. Range, 2,080 miles with drop tanks, double that of any German fighter. Service ceiling, 42,000 feet, well above the comfort zone of German pilots. Climb rate, 3,475 feet per minute, outperforming the Bf-109G above 20,000 feet. Armament, 6 or 50 caliber machine guns carrying 1,180 rounds, enough for prolonged combat. The Mustang's most revolutionary feature was its laminar flow wing. Its shape kept smooth airflow over 60% of the chord, cutting drag by nearly 30% compared to traditional wings. That innovation gave the Mustang the unmatched speed and range that made deep escort possible. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, Big Week unleashed the full power of American air strategy. Over 1,000 bombers, escorted by 900 fighters including 150 P-51Bs, struck German aircraft factories in carefully coordinated raids. This time, U.S. fighters did not only protect, they hunted. The Luftwaffe lost 355 fighters during Big Week. More devastating, however, was the death of roughly 100 veteran pilots, including many Staffelkapitän and Gruppenkommandeur. Their combat experience and leadership were irreplaceable. Losing them left younger pilots without guidance at the exact moment the air war demanded it most. On March 4, 1944, a new milestone arrived. The first American bombing raid on Berlin escorted by fighters. A massive formation of 660 B-17s and B-24s, protected by P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings, and P-47 Thunderbolts, filled the skies over the German capital. Adolf Galland himself took to the air in a Bf-109G, leading a scratch force against the raid. His after-action report to Göring was blunt. We were outnumbered 3-1 by escort fighters. The Mustangs had altitude, speed, and tactical advantage. We managed to damage 3 bombers before being scattered. I personally was pursued for 50 kilometers by 2 Mustangs who had fuel to play with me like cats with a mouse. For German civilians in Berlin, the illusion of Luftwaffe superiority collapsed as silver Mustangs performed loops over the Brandenburg Gate. The Nazi regime's claims of strength rang hollow as defeat loomed closer. By April 1944, Mustang units had adopted a ruthless new tactic. After completing escort missions, they descended to treetop level and strafed targets of opportunity on the way home. German airfields, once safe after Allied bombers passed, became killing zones. On April 13, 1944, this new strategy reached full effect. After escorting bombers to Schweinfurt, 42 Mustangs from the 4th Fighter Group swept down over Bavarian airfields. In just 30 minutes, they destroyed 51 aircraft on the ground, damaged 23 more, killed dozens of ground personnel, and wrecked maintenance facilities critical to Luftwaffe operations. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe was collapsing under relentless pressure. Pilot losses exceeded 25% of operational strength each month. Training programs could not keep pace. New pilots entered combat with only 110 to 160 flight hours, far less than the 220 to 250 hours German pilots had received in 1941. By contrast, American pilots averaged 400 hours before their first mission. The result was inevitable. The Luftwaffe, once feared across Europe, was now bleeding out, outflown, outgunned, and outnumbered. The arrival of the Mustang had turned the air war against Germany for good. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was in complete crisis. Some German pilots entered combat with as little as 80 total flight hours. General Johannes Mecki Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, recorded the situation in his memoirs. "We were receiving children as replacements. 19-year-old boys with minimal training. Many had never flown above 5,000 meters, never fired at a moving target, never practiced defensive maneuvers. Yet we had to send them against American pilots with 400 hours of training and often prior combat experience. The difference in quality became a force multiplier for American success." Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who scored 21 aerial victories, later recalled, "By spring 44, half the German pilots we faced were easy kills. They flew predictable patterns, ignored cloud cover, and panicked when surprised. The veterans were still dangerous. You could tell instantly by their flying, but they were becoming rare." The Allied bombing campaign against German oil facilities, which intensified in May 1944, created another disaster for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production collapsed from 180,000 tons in April to just 20,000 tons by September. Training flights were cut back, then canceled entirely. Combat operations were restricted to only the most critical missions. Meanwhile, American pilots flew constant training and combat missions, sometimes right over German territory itself. P-51 units carried out offensive fighter sweeps, designed not to escort but to seek out and destroy enemy aircraft. With virtually unlimited fuel supplies, they could loiter over German airfields and pounce as fighters took off or landed, striking them at their most vulnerable moments. The introduction of the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter in the summer of 1944 briefly revived German hopes. With a top speed of 540 mph, it was 100 mph faster than the P-51 Mustang. Hitler believed it could become a wonder weapon that would reverse the air war. But operational reality told another story. P-51 pilots quickly adapted their tactics, circling near jet bases and attacking the Me-262s during takeoff and landing. The Mustang's long range gave them the patience to wait. The Me-262's technical edge was undone by severe limitations. Its engines lasted only 10 to 25 flight hours before needing replacement, an impossible demand under collapsing supply chains. The jets required high-grade fuel that was no longer available in quantity. And most critically, they needed experienced pilots to use them effectively. By 1944, the Luftwaffe had almost none left. A few German jet pilots achieved individual success. Franz Schall shot down 10 P-51s, and Georg-Peter Eder claimed 9 Mustangs among his 12 jet victories. But such achievements were isolated. For every Mustang lost, dozens more were already in the skies. Strategically, the Me-262 made no difference. By autumn 1944, P-51 squadrons shifted focus to Germany's transportation network. Flying in squadron strength formations, They attacked locomotives, rail yards, bridges, and canal locks. The German economy, completely reliant on rail transport, began to collapse. On September 11, 1944, 36 Mustangs from the 357th Fighter Group destroyed 81 locomotives in a single day. Over time, the 357th would claim 595. 5 aerial victories, the highest of any P-51 group in the 8th Air Force. Reich Minister Albert Speer admitted the devastating effect in his diary. The American fighters have achieved what the heavy bombers could not: complete paralysis of transportation. Coal cannot reach power plants, parts cannot reach factories, and food cannot reach the cities. Beyond statistics, the Mustang inflicted a heavy psychological toll on German pilots. Men who once saw themselves as Europe's elite aviators now found their confidence shattered. Mustang pilots flew with an aggressive swagger, looping over German cities, performing victory rolls over strafed airfields, and fighting with overwhelming numbers and superior training. German fighter units developed grim jokes to mask despair. One said, "What does a German pilot need to win the Iron Cross? A P-51 escort to the cemetery." The desperation reached its peak on April 7, 1945, during the Sonderkommando Elbe mission. Between 180 and 200 Bf-109s, most flown by inexperienced volunteers, attempted suicide ramming attacks against American bombers. The result was catastrophic. American fighters claimed between 130 and 140 German aircraft destroyed, while losing very few of their own. After that day, the Luftwaffe ceased to exist as an effective force. Aircraft and pilots still remained, but commanders no longer had the will to send them up. The once proud air arm that had terrorized Europe was reduced to hiding its planes from destruction. The final record of the Mustang's impact speaks for itself. Total produced, 15,586 aircraft. Enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 1450 confirmed. Enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, 4,131 confirmed. P-51 losses from all causes, 2,520. Kill ratio approximately 3.6 in air-to-air combat. The P-51 Mustang had not only defeated the Luftwaffe in the skies, it had helped bring the entire German war machine to a halt. By 1944, the losses among German fighter pilots were devastating. On the Western Front alone, more than 8,000 pilots were reported killed or missing. Between January and May of 1945, another 3,000 were lost. The Luftwaffe's fighter force was being wiped out. The decline in operational strength tells the story clearly. In January 1944, Germany had around 1,600 operational fighters. By June 1944, this number had dropped to 1,480. By January 1945, it had fallen further to about 1,000. And by April 1945, only 325 operational fighters remained. Training time also collapsed as the war dragged on. American pilots in 1944 to 45 typically had 400 or more hours of flight time before entering combat. In early 1944, German pilots received between 160 and 220 hours. By late 1944, they were down to 110 and 160 hours. In 1945, some German pilots went into combat with as little as 80 hours total training. Historians widely agree that the P-51 Mustang was the single most decisive factor in giving the Allies air superiority. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that no other weapon had a greater impact. The Mustang made possible 3 critical achievements: the continuation of daylight strategic bombing, the securing of air superiority before D-Day, and the destruction of Germany's oil and transportation systems. North American aviation's production success was itself a miracle. At peak output, one finished Mustang rolled off the line every 90 minutes. The plants at Inglewood and Dallas employed tens of thousands of workers, with women making up about 40% of the workforce. This achievement stood in stark contrast to German production, which lagged far behind. While exact German figures remain uncertain due to poor records, it's clear that the U.S. alone built more P-51s than Germany, produced of all its single-engine fighter types combined in 1944-45. Training was another area where the United States held an overwhelming edge. By 1944, the Army Air Forces ran one of the largest and most advanced pilot training systems in history. Each pilot progressed step by step. About 65 hours in primary training, 75 in basic, 100 in advanced, and more than 160 in operational training. By the time they joined combat units, American pilots often had over 400 hours in the air, with heavy focus on gunnery, formation flying, and tactics. German pilots, by contrast, were often sent to the front barely able to control their planes, let alone fight seasoned opponents. The P-51's legacy extended far beyond World War II. It proved that lasting air superiority comes not from a single pilot's skill or one plane's design, but from a complete system, training, production, logistics, and technology working together. Even Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most respected aces, admitted later that while the Mustang was not superior in every single performance category, it was more than good enough in all of them. Combined with overwhelming numbers, highly trained pilots, and unlimited resources, it became unbeatable. At a NATO conference in 1975, General Günther Rall, who survived the war with 275 victories, explained it clearly. He said the Mustang didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed Germany's entire idea of what air superiority meant. The Germans thought of combat in terms of individual skill and tactical victories, expecting the P-51 to break them. They looked only at the aircraft itself, failing to see the factories, the training programs, and the industrial scale behind it. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. The hunters had become the hunted, and the skies over Europe now belonged to the Mustangs. The fall of the Luftwaffe was not only a military defeat, but also proof that a free and mobilized society could generate power that authoritarian systems could not match. In the end, the P-51 Mustang showed that victory in modern war came not from ideology or warrior spirit, but from industrial production, systematic training, and logistical strength. German pilots never thought they would be overwhelmed by the Mustang, but what they truly faced was the unstoppable productive power of American democracy. And when they finally understood it, their lesson came from the wrong end of 6.50 caliber machine guns, high above the burning ruins of the Third Reich.